Okay, hello and welcome to everyone who's joining us online now for our second episode of the Solidarity Sessions, co-hosted by Palestine Solidarity Campaign in the UK and Robit by PIPD. So my name is Rivka. I'm from the Palestine Solidarity Campaign, PSC, and I'll be co-hosting tonight's episode of the Solidarity Sessions.
And I'm Sarah from PIPD, your other co-host for tonight.
So we're going to put some information about our two organizations in the chat, and we'll also include it in the description of this event afterwards, and how to follow us on social media to find out more about what we do and how you can get involved. But I don't want to delay our very pressing conversation for tonight any further. And our topic for tonight is Stop Arming Israel. Who's profiting? Who profits from Israel's genocide?
Thank you, Rivka. And again, good evening, everybody. Last time we were on this screen, we would have never imagined to be witnessing live the unfolding genocide of Palestinians with the active complicity of the international community. Since the 7th of October, Israel has murdered more than 25,000 civilians in Gaza, of which a large number are children. Most of the landscapes looks like rubble today, as most of the buildings and infrastructure have been razed completely to the ground. Israel is dropping an average of 600 tons of bombs per day, with their explosive force having been at least over 3 times the atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima. You can imagine that. Not only, but in the past 3 months, Israel has been deploying specific weaponry which is prohibited under international law, and about which we will hear more from our guests tonight. The health conditions are extremely severe, if not unbearable, and many people have started dying also of hunger. In the West Bank, more than 350 Palestinians have been killed in the daily attacks and indiscriminate executions carried out by the Israeli military, not to mention mass arrests, and the list could go on for a long time. It has already happened in the past as well that after a major attacks on Gaza, in particular, Israel hits a record sale in arms deals. On the other hand, many countries take the opportunity to sell to Israel during war times. In the end, we know too well that it's all about profit.
Yeah, that's right. Thanks, Sara. And just to pick up from where you left off there, I think exactly as you said, the supply of military technology, of weapons to Israel is one of the key ways that Israel is able to sustain its genocidal violence against Palestinians. So interrupting the arms trade with Israel is one of the key ways that we as campaigners, as activists, can take action to stop Israel's genocide. So tonight we're going to discuss both the impact of that arms trade on Palestinians and the concrete steps we can take here, especially in Britain, in the effort to put an end to that arms trade. And we're really lucky tonight to have two guests with us who are experts in this topic. We're being joined by Dr. Shahd Hammouri, who's a lecturer in law and an expert in international law and war economies. And we're also joined by Saleh Hijazi, who's joining us from Palestine tonight, who is the Apartheid-free policy coordinator for the Palestinian BDS National Committee. So welcome to both of our guests. And Sara, I'm going to turn it over to you now for our first question.
Thank you, Rivka, and welcome, Shahd. Thank you for being with us tonight. So we would kick in directly into the first question, and why don't you start telling us what kind of weaponry Israel is using in its attacks on Gaza and in the West Bank as well, and especially what are the effects of this type of weapons both on people and infrastructure in Palestine?
Thank you for that, Sarah, and thank you for hosting me here today to come talk about this. To start with, it's really important to remember that Israel is one of the top exporters of weapons in the world. It is in the number 10 top exporters. And year after year, Israel comes to the UK to show its weapons through its multiple corporations in the DSEI arms fair. So, and there we usually see it use marketing campaigns of weapons it used on Palestinians in the past. This has been happening for years on in Excel in London, and we hope that this will be the marker for the end of such an exploitative logic, where the pain and suffering of people in one space is normalized as a space for the profit of others in another space, and it's unimaginable. So what we're seeing in the current context is a mixture of old and new weapons. As one of the reporters from the ground is telling us, Bisan, who's followed highly on social media, Israel is using new weapons that even for them, as people who are experienced in bombing, are surprising. We're seeing new types of injuries, as in terms of burns, in terms of fractures, and in terms of problems that happen to people neurologically. A good part of these issues that are coming and are affecting Palestinians at the moment will not be clear until this is all over, and some of it will also not be clear for years on. So to start with, one of the weapons that we have sent multiple letters to the UN about has been the 155 millimeter shells that originate from both the US and Germany. So these shells, to start with, are pretty cheap. They're from 2,000 to 8,000 pounds worth each, depending on the market. And Israel had a lot of those in its stock. It wanted to get rid of them, and at the same time, it ordered a lot more from the suppliers. So these are usually unguided, so they are akin to what we call dung bombs, and they have a high error radius. They usually release with each bomb 2 kilos of lethal fragments, and there we can see the injuries that come from people. And on average, according to statistics, when they're used in densely populated areas, 90% of those who die are civilians. So the sheer amount of destruction that would be caused by these weapons have led a lot of international lawyers to argue that the use of 155 millimeter shells in densely populated areas is a de facto war crime, and Israel uses them nonetheless in such contexts. So even when these bombs are guided by things like JDAMs, which are supplied by Boeing, they are still causing a lot of civilian damage. As Amnesty has recently documented, JDAMs were used, and the JDAMs were used in the killing of 43 members family members in a household. Second is the notorious white phosphorus that Israel insists to keep on using. So white phosphorus is a chemical that causes suffocation and direct burns to the body. It can burn through flesh. So in theory, this weapon is supposed to be prohibited. However, as we all know, and as I'm happy to talk about, international law is quite a very politicized space that we can approach in a political eye. So Israel hasn't signed on some of the relevant legal instruments that would directly forbid the use of white phosphorus. However, some would say that in terms of how it's used, white phosphorus should be seen as an internationally prohibited weapon due to the amount of destruction that it could cause. We also have 120 tank shells, and these are designed to destroy tanks, which means that they go through walls and then create a hole through that wall and enter the building on the inside. So and then they explode inside the building. And we have seen a lot of accounts by Palestinian families who've had that. Of course, it would kill everyone in that space, and a lot of times we can know that this type of weapon was used by the fact that at the end of the day we have a hole in the wall, if the wall, some of it is still standing. So it's a pretty grim way to kill people, and it might also some of the 120 tank shells might also be coming from Germany, though we don't have particular evidence. You all must have heard of the bunker busters that were used in Jabalia refugee camps and were meant to, in theory, according to Israel, their use was supposed to be directed towards the destruction of tunnels. So bunker busters are more expensive, and they don't have much in stock. They're supplied by Raytheon in the US, They're precise, but they create a deep crater, as we saw. A whole building is not only just destroyed, but there's a hole in the ground as if a meteor has fallen from the sky to destroy these families. So there's also a risk that on its walls we might have depleted uranium used. However, we still do not have evidence to say that for sure. And then you've all heard of the 1-ton bombs, and those would be Mk-84s, and those would be supplied by General Dynamics. And of course, very notoriously are the drones supplied by Elbit System and Israel Aerospace Industries. Most famously is the Spike drone that has been said to cause tissues to be torn from the flesh, as per some of the witness statements collected thus far. These are made, some of these could be possibly made within the UK, since factories for Elbit systems exist in the UK. So, and then we have Spike missiles. So those are sold by Israel and currently being sold by Israel internationally like crazy. And then we have Iron Sting bombs, also by Elbit, Hellfire missiles by Lockheed Martin. I have to note that also we've seen more usage of AI, and I'll elaborate on that as we go further on. And these are used, a lot of them are used, dropped using F-35 warplanes. A good part of those are supplied from UK companies. And as per the effect of these, a good part of what has been discussed in international legal circles is the fact that the destruction in the infrastructure of Gaza is currently beyond imagination. And it has been one of the primary, the usage of weapons in such a destructive way has been one of the primary evidences that we have for genocidal intent. These weapons have been used on a mass level as illustrated in the introduction, and have been used extensively all across Gaza. So we're not only looking at new types of injuries, and we're not only looking at over 100,000 people who are currently injured without proper access to healthcare. We're also looking at the structure of infrastructure in a way that is unprecedented, in a way that is meant to deplete the life in Gaza. We've also seen the use of this weapon sometimes on even empty buildings, just to show strength in what can only be described as a childish manner of a show of power that is only suitable for bullies and kids in kindergartens. I'll continue on explaining the corporations related to that later on. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Shahd. It's really important, I think, to get some of those details that you provided. I'm going to turn now to Saleh, who's from the BDS National Committee. Saleh, what are the main countries that are involved in the arms trade with Israel? We heard a little bit from Shahd, the UK and the US, but if you could give us a little bit of a wider picture, and what is it that we can understand from that map of how the arms trade is operating?
Yes, hi Rivka, and hello to everyone who's listening or watching. Let me begin by saying, as Sarah was saying at the beginning, that Israel's far-right government is continuing its genocide against the 2.3 million Palestinians in the occupied and besieged Gaza Strip, and escalating the ethnic cleansing in the West Bank here, where I live, in full military, financial, political, diplomatic partnership with the US, with the UK, and other Western colonial powers. This genocidal war in Gaza is carried out with weapons that are supplied by these Western powers, especially the United States, which has been the largest single provider of military financing and arms to Israel for decades. But also Canada, Germany, Italy, and of course the UK, among others. Some states, including the US and the UK and Germany, have fast-tracked their supply of military equipment and weapons to Israel during the ongoing genocide. The UK, for example, provides components of the F-35 fighter jets, which are dropping bombs on Gaza, but are also sending the UK is sending its own drones to provide intelligence to the Israeli military and helps Israel develop drones which are quieter which are perhaps better for example, extrajudicial executions that Israel systematically carries out, and can carry heavier loads and last, for example, longer in the sky. So there's a very, very active role in supplying weapons, but also improving the weapons that are already there. Israel admits openly, or Israeli officials admit openly, that they can only maintain the onslaught and the genocide with constant resupply of ammunition, particularly from the US. Otherwise, they would run out of ammunition and they will have to accept, for example, a ceasefire. And I think it's very important here to ask, why is this happening? And the answer here is that Israel's perpetration of the world's first live stream genocide provides the hegemonic West, the US, the UK, Germany, and other European powers, an opportunity to test a new doctrine of unaccountable, unmasked, and extreme violence against those who challenge Western powers and their interests. This would replace the already unjust and oppressive world order that has existed since the Second World War, which is formally ruled by international law, with a might makes right era. And it's very important to recognize that weapons are at the heart of this.
Thank you very much, Saleh. Absolutely, we cannot be proud of this. You've mentioned some of the main countries involved in arms trade with Israel. And Shahd, now I'd like to ask you, as private and public often intertwine very strictly, what are actually the arms companies that have been most active during these last 3 months in supplying the Israeli military? And as we title this event, who's making a profit out of this genocidal war?
Thank you, Sarah. One of the most surreal things that I saw at the start of the war are the transcripts of investor meetings at big US arms corporations, where they were assuring their investors that the outlook towards the future is that of a very bright one. So, and these meetings include the corporations of General Dynamics, Raytheon, Boeing, Lockheed Martin. And it is estimated very roughly that up until now, these companies have made a profit that exceeds 25 billion US dollars. And that is a very very low estimate of how much profit was made, especially that we usually when we have further aid going into military aid going to Israel, and of course the expedited military expenditure of Israel itself, as well as the general outbreak in the Middle East that is pushed for by Israel, has led to an acceleration in the sales. But not only that, investors are looking for their money to go up in these corporations. So it is in the benefit of these corporations for the war to keep ongoing. We're also looking at the rampant sale of F-35 planes as well, and as kindly noted by Saleh, the UK is on this, but also corporations in the Netherlands. We also have corporations in Germany like Rheinmetall, who's making, as far as we can estimate, a good deal of profit on the sale of 155 millimeter shells alongside other ones. It's very important to note that Germany actually had a halt on all of its weapons sales that only was stopped during the war in Ukraine. And then it's as if the recent war has allowed it to re-establish its position in the international arms industry. So we also have the corporation Nammo from Norway that is being looked at currently for its complicity. And of course, we have BAE Systems for components of F-35s. We know that some of these parts are actually currently being manufactured here, where I'm talking to you in Kent, but specifically in Rochester, and that also includes specifically the active interceptor systems that pilots use to maneuver the planes, and the durability testing usually would happen in East Yorkshire. And we also have F-16 planes coming out of the UK from all other smaller corporations. And of course, we have Elbit Systems that has been making insane amounts of profit ever since the start of this war. We also had a very interesting new entrance to the system, which is through AI technologies that run weapons. One very important corporation that came to the scene lately was Palantir, which is an American-based corporation. And there's been a very long debate on automated weapons. So what Israel is hoping to do is to actually pioneer that field, and it has been trying to also negotiate, let's say, less strict rules in relation to the regulation of autonomous weapons internationally. However, there's also suspicion in relation to Google and Amazon's complicity in relation to supplying AI technology to the IDF. And on a side note, outside of the arms industry, we're also looking with suspicion at big oil and gas corporations in the US and in the UK, such as BP, who were also given very green light at the start of the invasion. And the most recent eruption of hostilities in Gaza, that their outlook for investments in oil, gas and oil exploration in Israel are stable. And of course, within the forced mass displacement project of Israel is a future project for exploration of gas on the shores of Gaza. So we also need to keep an eye on those who hope to profit from that. And even though these corporations don't still have a foot in Gaza, for their investors, this looks like good news, and they've already started to make profit out of those as well.
Yeah, it's such an important point that you've mentioned at the end there, Shahid, that in some ways the global arms trade that we're talking about and the arms trade with Israel is beyond just what are traditionally considered arms companies. I think that's a really important point for us to take up. Saleh, I want to turn to you next, but let me just say in the meantime, I see in the comments that a lot of people are saying hello from the different locations they're in: Bristol, London, Brighton, Manchester, all over the place. So thanks to everybody who's mentioning where you're from, and please keep doing that. Saleh, I'm going to turn to you now, and the next question is, we've been speaking mostly about countries and companies selling arms to Israel now, but Israel, of course, is also a major producer of weapons and military technology. We've touched on that a little bit. Can you say something more about the role that Israel plays globally in the export of arms? What does that look like? What does the process look like? And who does Israel sell to?
Yes, so this is a very important question for two reasons. One, according to international law, human rights organizations, legal experts, the sale and transit of weapons, as well as buying weapons from a state that is committing war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide in the case of Israel, is illegal. Yeah? And weapons are a crucial part of Israel's brand. The weapons and the violent, oppressive technologies, or weaponized technologies, if you want, that it produces, or its companies produce and sells to countries around the world, is part of this brand. And this is especially appealing to dictatorial regimes or authoritarian regimes. These weapons are sold as field tested, meaning they are tested on us, Palestinians. And they get put in practice or in use elsewhere, such as Africa, for example, which as a continent is the largest market for Israeli weapons. But Israeli weapons, Israel and Israeli weapon companies have the global north always as a market. So basically they say it's field tested. It's been tested twice here, once at home where we're developing it, but then elsewhere where it was sold and bought. And here you could see, what these weapons can be used for. And many times Israel hides behind the facade of, for example, so-called development to be able to create markets for its weapons, such as, like, for example, in Africa. And here I want to mention this great report by an organization called Grain International. The report is called Farms, Arms, and Israel's Agro-Diplomacy. And the report looks at the link between Israel's drive to build mega farm projects in different African states, and its arms industry, and how this leads to catastrophic results on people, on farmers, land grabs, and puts the state in, the states that are getting into these projects in further debt. And in many cases, like, for example, South Sudan, which is illustrated in that report, these farms then turn into military training bases where Israel can sell its services as well as provide weapons. And so massive devastation that is brought to the areas where this is. And you could see here in terms of kind of the process, how the markets are created and how Israel sells these weapons. So this report, highly recommended if anybody is interested. But I think important to also mention that some of the main buyers of Israeli weapons include India as a state. It's the largest market, Poland, Hungary, Azerbaijan, Morocco, Brazil, Mexico, Philippines. The list goes on, and the atrocities committed with these weapons are enough to fill, several hours of talk or pages. Which brings me then to the second reason for why this question is important, and the key word here is intersectionality. Our movement, the Boycott, Divestment, and Sanctions movement, is an intersectional movement, that we believe that our struggle for freedom, justice, and equality goes hand in hand with other struggles around the world for freedom, justice, and equality. And one intersection is Israeli weapons. They're used to commit genocide, entrench settler colonialism and apartheid in Palestine, and are used then in committing atrocities and human rights violations elsewhere. So it is, I think, very important right now that as we're talking about weapons, as we're talking about the military embargo on Israel, is also see how Israel's, if you want, exporting of its oppression, of its atrocities elsewhere through the weapon sales.
Thank you very much, Saleh. You have really highlighted many important points, and especially the fact that, and again, the Palestine cause is not only local, but is really global, because we can say what Israel exports globally is toxic for the future we want to live in. And you mentioned, like many countries that we know, Israel has been dealing with exchange of training for police, for the military, and so on. And this really brings me to the next question that I'd like to ask you, Shahd, because of your legal expertise that you are able to bring to this discussion when it comes to, as well, a state level. Can you tell us about how the legal grounds for an arm embargo, for example? What are the elements of international law that are relevant in an arena such as this? And also, we are conscious that we are having this discussion as we wait to hear back from the ICJ on its provisional ruling, but how might that impact the legal argument of military embargo on Israel?
Thank you for that, Sarah. So multiple things. First of all, we have to remember that the end of apartheid South Africa started with an arms embargo, and the UK was one of the last states to take the arms embargo on, which is a historically shameful position for the UK to have sat on. And sadly, we might be seeing the same. And we look at the case of South Africa as one of the cases that might guide us into thinking of how possibly is it that one day we will reach a situation where the Palestinian people have their justiciable rights, not only through the end of the illegal occupation of Palestine, but also through reparations and the recognition of their equal rights as humans. And also, let's remember that in the case of colonial Algeria, one of the only ways that persuaded the French to leave was when the war was no longer financially sustainable. And that's what we should keep in mind. By the looks of it, the language of international law is not something that Israel wants to listen to. And not only that, it wants to create an exceptionalist space for itself. This exceptionalist space can be traced to the starting of the history of international law as we know it today in modern international law post-World War II dynamics. So Israel wants to upkeep that. It wants to upkeep an imperialist space for itself. However, we are at a point where perhaps the logic of justice is just too overwhelming in the room, that the whole of international law will be drawn to absurdism if we do not acknowledge the justice behind the cause of the Palestinians. So to begin with, and with a very broad brush in relation to the ongoing proceedings at the International Court of Justice, the case is about genocide, which is basically the biggest, one of the biggest crimes you could commit in international law. And it has a very specific convention on the prevention of genocide. So with the enactment of the convention, if we see hopefully very soon, at least an order for provisional measures by the International Court of Justice, that means we have officially entered the scope of the Genocide Convention. Of course, others would argue that we have already, that the Genocide Convention and the duty to prevent genocide has already been activated 2.5 months ago, when the world leading scholars on genocide and the world leading scholars in international law came out to say that there is a clear risk for genocide. And you just need the risk to enact that convention and to put that red alert into place. And that is a very specific legal instrument, because that red alert was meant to evade this horrible and horrendous thirst of blood that we currently see when the death of tens upon thousands of people is normalized, and the level of destruction and usage of weapons. And it's by human acknowledgement that we have done this before and we should never do this again. However, sadly, that hasn't been enacted. So the duty to prevent genocide would mean that all states have a positive duty to take every action possible to make sure that genocide doesn't happen, which of course would include an arms embargo against the state in question. Not only that, states would then be at the risk of complicity with genocide. And we've already seen civil society organizations in the US take the Biden administration to court. The hearing in California, the preliminary hearing in California, will be happening next week. And you can go to the website of the Center for Constitutional Rights if you want to follow that live. And one of the primary arguments there is that the supply of weapons is evidence for complicity in genocide. So for states to abide by the Genocide Convention, they would have to partake in an arms embargo against Israel. However, more generally, as I just said, the illegalities of the current onslaught in Gaza have to also be seen as coupled with the grave illegalities of the Israeli occupation as a whole. We currently have another parallel case at the International Court of Justice. The hearings for it will be in February, and that is an advisory opinion on the consequences of the illegality of the Israeli occupation as a whole. And the argument there is that Israeli occupation is a grave violation of international law, as it runs against the right of self-determination of the Palestinian people and against the prohibitions of aggression and apartheid. So with those two things in mind, state responsibility is definitely enacted in two respects. First of which is the duty of non-recognition, which is inscribed into international law and has been reasserted in the ILC draft articles on state responsibility, as well as the court's decision in 2004 in relation to the separation wall built by Israel. And what I mean by the duty of non-recognition is to take all economic measures not to recognize or support the grave illegality at hand. And again, that would include an arms embargo. Similarly, there is a duty to cooperate that is supported by the same sources, to cooperate towards ending the illegality. And if I just described legal precedents where the diminishing of economic support and the supply of weapons have meant the end of the illegality, then we as humans know very clearly that ending now any supply to Israel in that regard would be one of the most important elements in ensuring that we reach accountability and justice for the Palestinian people. So it's a very direct relation, and actually, from a legal perspective, we are heading towards that. The next step, despite the whatever comes out of the International Court of Justice, and even if that comes out positively, we still are looking towards enacting it, and Israel most likely will not enact it. And most likely we are still looking towards getting all the way to the Security Council, and most likely we will still be faced with a veto. However, as the precedent shows us, and as the case of South Africa shows us, there the General Assembly rose to bring forth resolutions in relation to arms embargoes. The General Assembly is usually led by states of the Global South, and hopefully one day we will have a decolonial reading of international law that actually gives merit and power to UN General Assembly resolutions. But in this case, what we're hoping to do is mass lobbying towards putting states into an arms embargo. Of course, we hope that it will become clear bit by bit to states the gravity of the illegality at hand and the need not to stand next to the wrong side of history. For example, now we've seen Belgium perhaps rise towards supporting the case. We've seen Slovenia also do the same thing. So we are hoping that there would be a change in the position of states, and that an arms embargo would be the next step that is, and I can't stress how essential it is towards safeguarding the rights of the Palestinian people into the future, and of course, as an eminent solution towards ending the current onslaught against the people in Gaza and the West Bank.
Thank you, Shahd. And obviously, we're watching those cases very closely, and particularly in the next few weeks. I think we're supposed to hear something about the provisional ruling within a month or so. So we'll be keeping an eye on that. And obviously, there's a lot you can do with the PSC and other organizations to push our government to recognize the need for a ceasefire in particular. I want to turn back to Saleh now. Saleh, obviously, we've mentioned it a little bit, but Israel's armed violence against Palestinians didn't start in October 2023. And for many years, the Palestinian-led BDS movement, which you're representing here tonight, has been calling for campaigns to build towards a military embargo in the way that Shahd was mentioning. And that call, of course, right now has increasing urgency. In some of the BDS movement's communications about the South African case over genocide, there's a mention that states have a responsibility, which Shahd described there, but also that ordinary people, activists, campaigners around the world can take action to stop the genocide by participating in BDS campaigns focused on the arms trade with Israel. So I wanted to ask, how are you seeing that manifest around the world, that grassroots activism?
Yeah, thanks, Rika. Let me say and emphasize just how important the case, the South African case against Israel for committing genocide in Gaza is important. This is unprecedented. We have Israel on trial for the first time in 75 years. And regardless of what the court decides, and it is very important what it decides, in the court of public opinion, Israel is committing genocide. And while international law is important, Israel is destroying international law, and the Western powers are helping with the destruction of international law. But change comes through people taking action, through the agency of people coming together. That it's only through building people power that we can create the change that we want. And this is true with regards to, for example, a military embargo. States would move only with people pressure on them. This was proven true in the case of South Africa, and we're hoping that it also proves true in the case of the settler colonial regime, Israel's settler colonial regime that is committing genocide here in Palestine. And we have seen since October that the military embargo campaign against Israel has grown rapidly in unprecedented in size, in terms of kind of people participating in it and people taking it up, the energy. And so really massive thanks to all the people around the world who are taking action and participating in the military embargo campaign and other campaigns that the BDS is running. The military embargo campaign was on the basis of an issue of a call issued by the Palestinian BDS National Committee, which is the leadership of the Palestinian of the BDS movement, and which is kind of the largest coalition in Palestinian society. When in 2011 it called for a comprehensive military embargo on Israel. It asked governments, institutions, and people to support ending military aid and weapons exports to Israel, and ending exchange of weapons and military technology to and from Israel, and seizing all forms of military and security research, cooperation, training, and so on. And the call for a military embargo is now supported, and this support has increased over the years. As I said, we've been seeing kind of a pickup of it since the genocide is being perpetrated in Gaza by major international human rights organizations. For example, Amnesty International calls for a military embargo on Israel. Political parties, non-governmental organizations, trade unions, advocacy groups, and others. At this time of genocide, and this has been very inspiring, we've seen activists, unionists, and political parties already stopping arms shipments. And examples of those are in Belgium, in the United States, and Australia. Others have made clear statements of their intention to stop ships going through, including also in Belgium, Netherlands, Greece, Italy, Spain, just to name a few. Palestinians are asking for more such actions to disrupt the flow of weapons, to continue that basically continue the genocide in Gaza, and not to allow business as usual to go on. We've been calling for building of broad coalitions to organize grassroots and civil society campaigns, including strategic and peaceful direct action, to pressure parliamentary parties and groups and other influential actors to push governments to adopt meaningful sanctions, especially a comprehensive military embargo on Israel. This includes pushing transit states that I've mentioned before to stop allowing the transport of weapons through their ports and airports in states that are allies of Israel, basically most of the West, as well as India, Japan, South Korea. These campaigns can consider, adopting, for example, the Amnesty International call for a military embargo on Israel. But we are also asking to put pressure, including by boycotts, on institutions and corporations that invest in weapons and the weapons industry in Israel, and companies. And a good example here is, the PSC, Palestine Solidarity Campaign, campaign to boycott Barclays Bank for its complicity in Israeli crimes. I'd leave it to you to say more about it, but I would call on all people to join PSC's campaign in the UK, to join PSC's campaign to boycott Barclays. People also can help by checking whether other banks, their banks that they have their money in, their investments, pension funds, or even unions may have investments in the Israeli weapons industry. And as I was saying, with people power, we can make a military embargo happen. Just as Shahd was saying, in the case of South Africa, it was not that the UK decided all at once that it's woke up to say, oh, now I recognize what is right. It was by the pressure of the anti-apartheid movement at the time. And here it is important to note that, this is not a wishful campaign. We have a great opportunity at the moment. And as I said, the campaign is growing exponentially, and it builds, and I think this is important, it builds on impact throughout the years of countries stopping arms trade with Israel, such as South Africa, for example. Other examples are the Norwegian government has an official policy of not exporting weapons to Israel as a government. The Spanish state has denied some licenses for arms exports to Israel. More than a dozen financial institutions have announced their divestment from Albert System, which Dr. Shahd talked about. over its role in Israel's oppression and crimes against the Palestinian people. And this is only to give just a few examples. And people can see more about the military embargo campaign run by the BDS and its impact so far also on our website, which is bdsmovement.net.
Yeah, thank you for that, Saleh, and definitely everyone take a look at that website. And it's been, I have to say, it's been really inspiring over the past few months. Obviously, with all the horror we're seeing, to see those actions of workers blocking shipments to Israel, and obviously there's a precedent of that happening in other situations too. So there's so much work for us to be doing. I want to pick up on the point that you mentioned about the Barclays campaign, because we have a big new development in that campaign that I want everybody who's watching tonight to take part in. So Barclays, as some of you will know, is one of Britain's largest banks. There are branches on high streets all around the country, and research that PSC has conducted has shown that Barclays is not just providing bank accounts to people in Britain, but the bank also holds over £1 billion in shares in companies whose weapons and technology are being used by Israel in its attacks on Palestinians. And not only that, it also provides some £3 billion in loans to those companies too. So that means that Barclays is a prime example of a company that is profiting from Israel's genocidal violence. And some of the companies that Shahd spoke about before, General Dynamics was one of them, a company that produces gun systems used on the fighter jets that Israel is using to bombard the Gaza Strip. Elbit Systems, which we've talked about quite a bit, is also invested in by Barclays. Elbit, of course, produces armored drones, munitions, and artillery weapons that are used by the Israeli military, and a number of other companies. So Barclays is really at the core of financing some of these companies. And by providing that investment, the financial services to these arms companies, Barclays is really facilitating the provision of weapons and technology for Israel's attacks on Palestinians. So that's the reason why we've launched a campaign against Barclays Bank. And we're calling on all concerned people to boycott Barclays services until the bank ends its grave complicity in Israel's attack on Palestinians. And it's worth noting also, and I know some of the people that are watching tonight will know this, Barclays is not a first-time offender. And some of you will recall that it was a campaign target in the 1970s and 80s over its role in supporting apartheid in South Africa. So it's important for us to take up the campaign against Barclays now. I want to give you very specific examples, very specific instructions on how to do that. So in order to have the greatest impact possible in any boycott campaign, but especially here, we want as many people as possible to close their Barclays accounts on a single day. And that day that we've chosen is February 9th. So it's coming up. And also to tell the bank why. So it's not enough to just go and cancel your account if you have a Barclays account. The bank needs to know why, and it's going to be most impactful if everyone's doing it at once. So we're going to put a link in the chat right now that takes you to a web page where you can pledge to switch your account on February 9th. And that page also gives instructions on how to do it. And by the way, I should mention, it's really easy to switch your bank account and it's free. So you won't be paying money to switch your bank account. If you're not currently a Barclays customer, there's a different letter that you can send to tell Barclays that you won't use its services, so pledging not to use Barclays services because of its complicity. And finally, after you've taken both of those actions, if you're based in Britain, this coming weekend, so this Saturday, there's going to be local actions taking place all around the country to protest at Barclays branches. This is a really important campaign that can have a lot of impact, especially if it grows bigger. So as many of you as possible who are watching tonight, so we're putting the instructions in the chat, and we'll make sure they're in the description of this event also. Please participate in this campaign. It's a really important way for us to participate in the Stop Arming Israel campaign, in the global efforts that Saleh described, and an important way for all of us to take action to do what we can to put an end to Israel's genocidal violence. So I think those, yep, it looks like those links have gone in the chat. now. And please do, everybody who's watching, take a look. If you've already taken the actions, please send them along to your friends and family so we can get as many people as possible on February 9th to switch their accounts.
Thank you, Rivka. Thank you all. It's exciting to imagine you guys crushing all Barclays branches in one day and literally create, like, disturb them, and also maybe crushing their systems. Really exciting, and I encourage you guys to participate in the campaign. And now, before we end, I wanted to turn back to our guests, Saleh and Shahd, to ask you if you have any comments, or do you want to add something to what it has already been said. It's a free space. Please come forward, and maybe I'd start with Shahd if you'd like to.
Thank you for that. If I may start with the idea that what Barclays is doing is what we call atrocity financing. And atrocity financing is one of the forms of contributing to and benefiting from systematic grave violations of international law. Barclays is in direct violation of its duties under the business and human rights principles, which are evolving by the day. One of the great resources to look into further corporations that are partaking in atrocity financing is a website called Don't Buy Into Occupation. We've also shared in the chat a website by American Friends Service Committee, which provides a list, and the list is updated quite often in relation to the corporations that are supplying arms to Israel. And I wanted to say that like war economies are really interconnected and global, and supply chains that feed into the subsistence of violence within contexts of war are quite very complex, but are an integral part in our economies. We all have privilege and capacity if we live in the global north, and specifically if we live in the UK. People in Palestine don't have the privilege and capacity that we do, but they have the interest in the change. And with that, it is our moral responsibility to do everything that we can to end one of the gravest lack of injustices that the world has ever seen, where the UK, of course, has a very direct and important role. A good part of my work has been to contest corporations trying to say that we are innocent, that this is just commercial, and that what we are doing has nothing to do with war. In reality, what Barclays is doing, along with other corporations that are profiting from the war, is inevitably to make sure that they get money on the backs of people who are dying. This is something that our international system has normalized. And by taking direct activism in relation to Palestine, you're not only standing up for Palestinians, but you're also contesting an international system that has normalized the fact that some people, and I remember with the campaign with Kat, some people once a year go to have dinner in central London to celebrate the fact that they made a lot of profits in selling arms across the world that led to the death of thousands, if not millions, each year. And we need to remember that this is the type of world we live in. And that's why your voice, your activism is the only way forward, because our institutions are not built in a way to react to our voices. They're built in a way to normalize that. Thank you very much.
It's my turn. Look, I think what we say, the single most important reason Israel is able to continue to entrench its settler colonial apartheid regime for over 75 years now, and after the 75 years, after the Nakba of 1948, to continue with the ongoing Nakba, reaching to where we are today, the perpetrating of the first live stream genocide on a scale that is much larger than the Nakba of 1948. There are more than 24,000 Palestinians killed. More than 10,000 are killed under the rubble. Tens of thousands are injured. More than 2 million people are forcibly displaced, some of them more than 2, 3, 4 times. Now the ethnic cleansing in the West Bank continues. The only reason, the single most important reason for why Israel is able to do this is because of complicity. Complicity by states, complicity by corporations, complicity by institutions, and particularly in the global north, in the West. And so the most ethical and strategic action that people around the world can take to stop these atrocities, to protect human rights, and to contribute to the Palestinian struggle for national liberation, the struggle for freedom, justice, and equality, is to end complicity. And this comes in campaigns such as the campaign to boycott Barclays, and the actions that are taking place that Rivka has talked about, and other campaigns that look at the companies that are complicit, the states that are complicit, to put the pressure on them, to disrupt also business as usual. We cannot live with a genocide being perpetrated anywhere in the world. An injustice somewhere is an injustice everywhere, and we must take action. We must not allow business to continue as usual with apartheid Israel as it perpetrates genocide. So, and complicity, it is possible. We've seen it happen before in the case of South Africa. This is what brought down apartheid in South Africa, and we can also bring down apartheid and end genocide in Palestine. Thank you.
That's brilliant. Really, thank you all. I think you both stressed one very focal point, which is people have the power. Never forget this. They try to make us believe we don't, but we actually do. And what we can do is to put pressure until we see change. So thank you very much, everybody. Thank you, Rivka and PSC, and thank you to the colleagues who are behind the scenes helping us doing the event. And thank you very much, Saleh and Shahd, for joining us tonight. Thank you all who are listening to us. I saw that some people are also from the US. I don't know if I haven't spotted any other location, but thank you guys for tuning in as well from so far away. It has been a pleasure, and please do subscribe to PSC and Rabet YouTube channels. Follow both organizations on social media, and you can keep up with information, with campaigns, every action you can support for justice and the Palestinian people. So really, thank you again, everybody, and I wish you a lovely evening.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye, everyone.